be here. Always good to be here. I like to see a smiling audience out there. Makes me feel happy. Makes the sun shine, you see. Now, so I was asked to do a gallery talk. I'm gonna give you a little bit of my philosophy of photography, how I got started, a little bit about my life, and then how I got into working in Greenland and in Iceland. More recently in Greenland. I started in Greenland only about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Iceland, maybe 20 years. As Josh mentioned, I was born in '43. So I'll save you the trouble of doing the math. I'll be 76 in August. And so I started leading tours actually when I was 25. That's like 50 years ago. And who knew, you know? It's like you start doing something you enjoy doing. And people ask me how I planned my life. And I tell them it's like walking. You put one foot in front of the other, because as soon as you stop, you're going to fall flat on your face, right? So that's the secret to my life. I just keep on walking. There's nothing else to do. So we're going to talk about my life and about the work on the walls. And then people have always, every time I give a talk and I exhibit my work, people ask me some technical questions. I'm not the greatest person to answer technical questions. I know a lot about something, an old-fashioned word, like, you ready for this one? Photography. I mean, years ago, photography meant one thing. You know, you had a camera, right? You took photographs. If you were doing black and white, you worked in the darkroom. You had, your developer, your shortstop, your fixer. Like, you didn't have, that was it. You didn't have, well, sometimes people would have a water bath if they wanted to bring down the highlights some more. There are some things you could do to deviate slightly, but basically it was called photography. Well, it's a different world today, right? I mean, photography means so many things, and it's so many, people interpret the word in a very different way depending on their needs and what they want to do and their sort of orientation towards life. Briefly, I had an opening last night in Worcester, Massachusetts, a wonderful gallery called the Sprinkler Factory. It's an old factory made into a great big gallery space, a big front area and a back area. And they always have 2 openings at the same time. Well, between my opening and the other person, very nice guy, totally different work. His name is Louis Desprez. And interesting work. But the 2 shows were like, let's say you spent a week in an ashram, meditating, and then you walked out and you found yourself in the middle of 42nd Street in Times Square. That was kind of the difference, in the feeling of both shows. My show was called Sacred Places, and I started photographing some of the ancient stones of the British Isles. When I first met Paul Caponegro in the late 60s, he just came home from the British Isles. He had a National Endowment for the Arts, and he did a lot of work at Stonehenge and other sacred sites in the British Isles, and it just lit a fire under me somehow. And some of the first groups I took were to England, and I did photograph at Stonehenge, and back in 1970 and 71. So I exhibited some of those photographs in that show with some of the ancient Irish stone circles, and from Scotland, and some of the old early churches in Italy. So the whole thing is kind of like a meditation, the entire exhibit, where Louis Desprez's work was kind of like all higgly-piggly exciting stuff, bright colors and a lot of action, and it's like these flash things on TV, when they're doing the news and they do these little sound bites, and it goes click, 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 click. Not my style, Much more into meditative photography. I could describe what I do by an expression that my grandmother, who lived to be a little over 100, she used to say every time she was confronted with some new technology, she used to say, "I'm from the Old Testament." So, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, as they say, right? Another cliche there. So, that's me. And that's why I'm not going to describe how these prints were made, but you're very fortunate because I invited my good friend Mark Doyle, sitting in the back there. And Mark is the one who makes all these prints. And he will explain to you how he does it. I will explain why I work with, besides being friends for years, I was friends with Mark before I went to digital, so, and then I'll explain why I work now exclusively with Mark when making exhibition prints. We have another potential person. We saved you a seat in the front row. Yeah. Or if you don't want the front row, you can sit in front of Josh. It's up to you. So, okay, let me just get right into my philosophy, okay, of teaching and of photography. I love to start my talks with a quote, and those of you who've heard my talks before, I've heard the same quote, and that's by this 9th century German theologian. His name is Meister Eckhart. And he had said, art is not just for special people, but everyone is a special kind of an artist. And I had that philosophy forever. I taught photography at Clark University for 30 years. I was still doing trips at the same time. I was adjunct faculty, so I was able to sneak away and do my trips and kind of have some of my best students cover for me while I was gone. But that's another story. But I have found that we all have our own individual style, our own individual way of seeing, our own kind of reality, how we perceive something. I've had situations many times where I'm standing right next to someone and I'm making a exposure, say, of an old abbey in Ireland in the shadows of these 15th century windows and all that, and I'll show it to the person right next to me and I'll say, what do you think of that? And they'll say, wow, where'd you take that? That happens a lot. And it always kind of tickles me a little bit. But we all see things differently. I'm, as a photographer who as Josh mentioned, was influenced by Ansel Adams. I used to write to Ansel back in the 60s when I had questions. He came and gave a talk at the Boston Photographic Resource Center a few years before he died, I think around 72 or 73. And I met him there as part of a dinner kind of thing. And so we had a long, long chat. And he was very, very helpful. Really open, nice guy, easy to talk to. I come from this school, this older school of photography, of Ansel Adams and Edward Weston. This is sort of my interpretation of the world. And I use the word interpretation. My photographs are not documenting where I go. Like, none of my photographs would really make very good postcards. They don't really, they're not selling the country or the place where I am. My images are really, interpretations. And this is what I'm setting out to do. I'm not trying to document. I've had people travel with me whose goal, and there's nothing wrong with this, is to really make cliches because they work for stock companies or they sell postcards or something like that. And they want to make a cliche because they want to do something where people can say, oh, wow, I was there. They want to buy the postcard. That's another kind of photography. That's what I'm saying, like, photography is different things, for different people. We gravitate towards, as I said, sort of separate realities. I don't know if you remember back in the 60s or 70s, Carlos Castaneda's books, and there's a lot to that. As I said, it's just like showing the person next to you the picture you made and they don't know where it was taken. So we do see separately. I taught and have done black and white since, well, I actually got started, believe it or not, when I was still in high school, like in the late 50s. I had my first darkroom probably when I was in junior high school, which is probably around 55 or 56. And then in college, I got much more serious about photography. And then in 1963, it was interesting, it was sort of a turning point in my life. I bought something I've always wanted, a motorcycle. and it really did change my life because I only had it for about 3 months when a car ran into me. and kind of shattered my tibia in my right leg. And it's just amazing how life, it's like someone is out there directing what you should be doing, you know, and you have no choice but to go with it. You can't tell the director, no, I want to go left. What do you mean go right? You have to do what the director says, right? So I have this crash. I'm in the hospital, you know, for like 2 weeks or so, and they do, you know, all kinds of, they have to put a big rod in my tibia that sets off the machines at the airports to this day. And I come out of the hospital and I'm in a cast, like from my ankle to about here, you know, and I'm on crutches, and I get my mail, and there's a letter from Uncle Sam who says they need me over in Vietnam. So I went to the draft board, you know, and I had my x-rays in my hand here, and I showed it to them in the letter that they want me. And I said, you sure you want me? You know, so anyhow, they turned out they didn't want me because of the situation. Now, if I didn't have the motorcycle, we wouldn't be speaking here today, I guarantee it. You know, it's just amazing how certain things happen. You know, and then I think it was 4 or 5 years later when Johnson was president, they called up all the 1Ys. You know, 1Y, I don't know what it means then, or now, but then it meant unfit for military service under present standards. Anyhow, I'm still waiting to be called. They lost my file or something. This was, you know, before computers, and they never called me. So anyway, it's just fascinating how you set off on a course and you have something in mind that you really want to accomplish, and how the universe has to cooperate to get you to what you want. You have to know, if you don't know where you're going, you may not get there, or you may wind up someplace else. It's good to know, what are your concerns? My concern has been this kind of trying to understand my place in the universe somehow, of understanding where do I fit into the scheme of things, the bigger picture. I'm not talking about the day-to-day news, you know, that would make you go crazy if you were totally influenced by what happens on a day-to-day basis. You know, I mean, the bigger picture, you know, the evolution of the universe, you know, which reminds me, like the evolution of the universe, either I was talking to you, Rosie, or someone else, you know, no, I think it was you, you know, about, you know, like, your attitudes and where you are. You know, it sort of reminded me of a story that I love telling about Pablo Casals, the cellist. And when he was 80 years old, he was interviewed, and he said if he died tomorrow, you know, he would die a happy man. He just learned so much about music and the subtleties of music. When he was 90, he was interviewed again, and he said, probably no one's going to believe me how much more I've learned between 80 and 90, you know, about the subtleties of music that I didn't even know existed before. You know, I think he died when he was something like 97. But I mean, the point of the story is we are tied into the universe, folks. We are tied into an evolving universe. It doesn't stop. There's no end of the road, so to speak. How much can we learn? How much can we grow? You know, this we don't know. I call it our highest potential. We don't know what our highest potential is, but we don't stop growing. In terms of after we leave our bodies, anybody's guess. I like to go with the Dalai Lama personally, but I don't know. You know, it's like, you never know. A lot of people much wiser than I am who feel quite certain about what happens after. I don't know. I'm working on what I got right now and kind of very happy with it. So there's something, you know, in nature that has always really excited me. And it's hard to put words to it. I remember when I first saw Paul Caponigro's photographs of some of the ancient monuments of Ireland, like I felt like my blood tingle somehow. You know, it's like just seeing something that's so magnificent, it just changes you forever. I'll tell you a quick story about being changed forever. A good friend of mine in Ireland, who I know some of you know in the back row there anyhow, Michael McLaughlin, who's a photographer, Westport, County Mayo, born and bred in Ireland. He's only come to America like to visit me, or a few years ago we did that workshop with John Paul Caponigro, and he's been out to the Southwest to photograph, but he, got his inspiration in Ireland and has dedicated his life to becoming a photographer. And he went out to the Southwest of America a few years back, did some great photographs, went back home and had a fabulous exhibition. He had them printed fairly large, like some of my 32 by 38s here. Fabulous exhibition of work from the Southwest, and he published a little catalog to go with the show, and he asked me to write the introduction. So I said, happily I will do so. But I said, you have to tell me what got you into photography. Growing up in a rural area, and when he grew up, the west of Ireland really was quite rural. Now it's much more cosmopolitan. But back then it was really rural. And I said, well, what changed your life for you to, and he was doing like large format 4x5 film photography, and he had done the Inca Trail, and he'd done hikes through the Kathmandu Valley and stuff like that, all with a 4x5 view camera. So I said, well, what changed your life? And he told me the story when he was like 13 years old. He's walking up the main street in town, and he passed what's called a chipper, fish and chips place, and he glanced in, and he saw this photograph, a poster of Ansel Adams' Mount McKinley. And he stopped dead in his tracks, and he couldn't stop looking at that photo. And he never saw anything like that in his life. It did something to him. It really changed his life. He was, a young teenager, and he just stared at this image. And that was it. For the rest of it put him in a whole other direction. Before that, he couldn't wait to get his driver's license, all the normal teenage stuff. And this totally changed his life. So, we have these, these conscious moments in our life that kind of force us in a certain direction. And I, felt that, many, many years ago. I don't even know what originally started, but I know I've had these little booster shots along the way. Like when I saw Caponigro's work, in the late 1960s. Back in, probably like 1958 or 59. Okay, I'm still in high school, and some friends, and I grew up on Long Island. Friends of mine said, hey, I heard there's a photography show at the Museum of Modern Art, 11 West 53rd Street. Used to go there fairly often. And it was some guy by the name of Edward Weston, So, back when I was in high school, I didn't really know it didn't mean anything to me. But I said, okay, let's go. And I saw that show, and that was, for me, the changing point in my life. So there's something about Weston's work that still kind of speaks to me very, very strongly. I remember kind of walking from one room to the next, and the first image I saw was Edward Weston's Cabbage Leaf. And I swore like it took a breath when it saw me, like it expanded like a lung somehow. And it spoke to me, and his pepper, it just has an incredible kind of organic shape to it. It's hard to put into words, I'm not a poet. I'm not really a musician, although in Ireland I play the bodhrán, the Irish drum, and I play with a group of musicians there. But anyone could practice and keep the beat, but I couldn't, I'm not a real musician. But speaking of real musicians, Paul Caponigro is a concert pianist, and when I used to visit him back in the early 70s when he lived down in Bethel, Connecticut, I would bring my photographs. I'd come down once a month to visit with Paul, and he would look at my photographs and he'd put it on the music stand of his piano, and he'd play what he felt. And that's how he conveyed to me how he felt about my photographs. He never talked about them, he would just play music to them. So I've had some really wonderful experiences in my life, that have led me to this particular point in life. Okay, let's talk about what's on the walls here. First of all, I got to give you a little quote by Ansel Adams. Because when you talk about happy accidents, Well, Ansel said happy accidents happen to people who are out there the most. Okay, it's kind of hard to dispute that one. You know, you're there and you know, the sun just happens to be bursting through the clouds and you know, you happen to have your camera right there. Everything has to cooperate. I mean, the whole universe has to cooperate and you have to be tied into it to be ready to make the exposure at the right time. There's this quote by Minor White, something to the effect that spirit stands still long enough for the photographer it is chosen. Something like that. And in fact, if you get to Worcester, Massachusetts, you know, it's the other side of the mountains from here somewhere. It's only about an hour and a half away. At the sprinkler factory, you'd have to Google it to get the address. Actually, I think it's 38 Harlow Street, but you could Google it and put it in your GPS. My show is only open weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, and we're having a big kind of closing party reception April 21st. April, is that right, Paul? April 21st? Yeah. So if you're around, please come and I'd be there. I think you'd enjoy the exhibit. It's work from like 1970 to the present. And by the present, I'm talking about the present. Because I travel so much. I have some work I did in Japan just a couple of months ago of some Zen rock gardens that are really nice, and then a Zen reflecting pool. You know, those of you who've been to Japan know it is an amazing country. You know, it's clean and neat, and these wonderful like parks and Zen monasteries with gardens all over the place. Even in Tokyo, Kyoto, any of the big cities, wherever you are, within 10 minutes is some incredible open space that's just mind-boggling. So I started in Japan just a few months back, and I'll be going again next year. Which, before we go on, before I forget, this is that photograph I just talked about of the rock garden that I did in Japan. This top one of this photograph I call Homage to the Alchemist. And if any of you have read a book by Paulo Coelho, the Brazilian author, it's called The Alchemist, you'll know why this little tree in this ruin is called Homage to the Alchemist. You have to read the book to understand. And here we are in Scotland, Eilean Doonan Castle, just before the bridge in the Isle of Skye. So this is a list of my tours for 2019 and 2020, you know, on this particular flyer. Now I also brought in a flyer for my Greenland trip and my Iceland trip. This is not until next year though, March 26th, April 2nd, 2020. So you have plenty of time to save up. It's, you know, the only cheap thing about Iceland is getting there. You know, the airfare is really reasonable, but once you step off the plane, look out. You know, you want a beer and a hamburger, you know, that may be $40 right there. You know, like everything's expensive. Greenland is an amazing country. You see this, you know, my ice photographs are all from Greenland. This one that sold on opening night, Iceberg in the Fog. I mean, I think Greenland is the next Iceland. Right now, Iceland is very touristy. You have to really know where to go, otherwise you're going to get stuck behind 20 buses and 10,000 people. I mean, 20 years ago, it wasn't like that. You know, you got to get up early in the morning and get out there while the bus people are still having breakfast. You know, if you want to get to some of the better sites in Iceland. Where we go on the east coast of Greenland, we're the only tourists. The only ones. The east coast is not developed for tourism. The west coast is developed for tourism. The capital is Nuuk, and there's hotels, and it's a real city, you know, on the west coast. The east coast, Inuit villages that are like 20, 30, or 40 miles apart. One of the villages is called Tassilak, and in Tassilak, I know a Danish man who refurbished a few houses, made them up to Danish standards, which are, you know, as good as ours or better. So it's plenty of heat, hot water, you know, indoor plumbing, you know, everything we need. And he has a Danish cook, so like we're not eating whale and seal or walrus, you know, like we're eating real, honest to goodness food. And it's the only trip that I do where there's very little physical activity. Some people like to climb mountains and some people can't climb mountains. I have someone going to Greenland with me this year who has to get around with a little electric scooter because he can't walk at all. And he has crutches. He could be helped doing a couple of steps, but that's about it. But he and his wife really want to do a trip together, and I told them Greenland's the only trip where you're in the house, we pick you up in the morning, we take you down to the boat dock, help you into the boat, and you're off sitting down in the boat till we bring you back. So, you know, we do have an afternoon off, and some people explore the village or go through the hills in the back. You know, he will be on his scooter going through the town. So it'll still be an adventure for him, but I mean, you could be handicapped and do Greenland. It's the only country that really I could say that about. So you're welcome to take any of these flyers, you know, afterwards. This is something very few people know about, and I think everyone who's gotten this has really enjoyed it. It's kind of like a photographic meditation. It's about 40 minutes of slide dissolve, kind of like a show of my work, and there's poetry and music that go along with the photographs. The poetry is by an Irish poet who recites the poetry in Irish with English subtitles. And this is maybe every 6th or 7th photograph does he have the English, the poetry. And the musician, an amazing guy, Eugene Skiff. He's a friend from South Africa who now lives in London. He had to leave South Africa because he was working with Nelson Mandela, and the cops were after him. So he went to England and you know, had to pursue you know, his musical career there. He has composed for the London Philharmonic Orchestra, the London Sinfonietta, the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, etc. But he's a really well-known you know, musician, composer, etc. And he composed music to go with my photographs. So again, it's the type of thing you have to put on and in a quiet room, turn off the phone, and listen to it. It's about 40 minutes of my photographs. I think you'd enjoy it. So you can look through this stuff later on. I just wanted to tell you what's on the table here. So getting back to what Ansel Adams said about you know, happy accidents happen to those people who are out there the most. Well, you know, we had the opening here, what was it, a month ago, I think? 2 months. 2 months ago now. Time flies. Quite a few people asked me about the photograph that is dead center over Mark Doyle's head. Yeah. That particular image. Talk about being the right place at the right time. Okay, do you remember, what was it, a few years ago? There was a volcanic eruption. The news people called it the volcano. Its real name was Eyjafjallajökull, but they had trouble saying that, so they called it the volcano. And it stopped air traffic for like 9 or 10 days, and people were stranded in Europe and all that. Yes. Well, there was this dust cloud, of ash cloud, I should say, and it landed on the ice around this waterfall. The waterfall is called Dettifoss, and it just landed on a whole hillside of freshly fallen snow and ice, and then the winds would whip things around, you know, and then there'd be some melting, so some of the stuff would melt, and some of the stuff would, you know, like where there was clumps of it would stay darker, and it kind of looks like if you're stirring to make a brownie mix or something like that. You know, so it's just the ice and the snow and the lava ash that settled there, and I happened to be there for the few days where that whole thing existed before it like melted or got snowed over, and was able to compose with those incredible swirly designs in the foreground, you know, and the waterfall in the background. I mean, I don't think that adds or subtracts from the photograph, but basically that's how, you know, I made that particular image. Now, everyone has a little different story. This one, I was trying to think of a good name for it, and my wife came up with a chorus of ice. You know, because it kind of felt like there they're singing or something, you know, like little open mouths there. And in Greenland, we go out on this fairly nice sized boat, you know, right after breakfast, like about 9:30. We don't get back till about 4:30 in the afternoon. And Lars, the man who owns the house and the boat, knows exactly where the ice floes are, the big icebergs. And he takes us there, and we go slowly around to photograph. And there's you know, like from day to day, it's changing because it's all melting, you know, at quite a rate. So it's just interesting ice formations. So that's from Greenland. Early in the morning, once we came across, it was very foggy. So we approached, you know, this particular iceberg in the fog. Some of the images were actually done from a helicopter. Some of them were done, a lot of them were done from a boat. A lot of them, like and certainly in Iceland, they're all done on land. This is the chunks of ice there. There's a black beach, a very famous one called Jökulsárlón. And Jökulsárlón has gotten very, very popular. It's like really, when I'm talking popular to the seventh power. You know, it's difficult to photograph now. But this is not by the parking lot. This is across the road, down below is this black beach, and it's not nearly as populated as the main part of Jökulsárlón. That's an ice lagoon where ice breaks off the moraine of the glacier and has to, you know, literally it's stuck in a lagoon, and it flows out from underneath a bridge. So you're standing there like 10 yards from the parking lot, and you can make fantastic exposures. And I have quite a few of those, in fact, in the Journeys book, you know, of just the ice flows in the water, right from the parking lot. Like you don't have to walk too far for that one. This one on the Black Beach, that's in the ocean. That's when when the ice goes under the bridge, goes out into the ocean, and then the tide comes in, and it brings the ice back onto the beach, and it melts, you know, on the beaches. So we get some wonderful photographs of it melting on the beaches. Other things in Iceland, this is called Hvítserkur. This rock formation or lava formation. And that's sort of the northwest of Iceland. And you know, there are little signs so you could find the place, okay? Then there's a little boardwalk. And this is taken from down below, but you know, there's no sign that says where the trail is to get down below. That's the thing. There's a viewing station on top, but then you're looking down on it. But I like it from down below where you have the sky in back of it as opposed to water in back of it. It took me a long time to find the right way to get down. Way down the beach, there's a little bitty trail that you could get, and then you got to walk back. But it makes a huge difference. I like looking up at things more than looking down at things. You know, that's just me. Looking around here, you see a lot of the water photographs are like slow exposures. I generally prefer a slow exposure because, I mean, water is motion. I'm making a still photograph. I'm not trying to make an exact copy of the water, which you can't in two-dimensionally, you know. So you have a choice of using a fast shutter speed and then you're freezing the water, and that doesn't look very natural. Or you can have a long exposure, and then it becomes much more of an interpretation. And then everyone has their own choice. There's no correct shutter speed for photographing water. You know, it's just kind of, you know, what you enjoy looking at, you know. You have a question?
No, it's just, would you speak about the dancing glaciers?
I get it to what you're talking
The
about.
dancing glaciers?
Oh, here.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dancing glacier. Well, you know, every photograph has a story, right? Okay, well, I'll try and be brief. But, I mean, I could end it, the last sentence of the story would be, it was taken from a helicopter. But there's more to it. I had a show in Reykjavik, the National Museum of, it's called National Museum of Iceland. right in Reykjavik. And I had about 13 photographs there that I had brought over, and I bought the glass in Iceland, and I brought the frames with me and everything else, and I used the back room, one of the workrooms of the museum to assemble everything, for the exhibit. Then when the exhibit is over, the work came down. Well, there was a company in Reykjavik that offered to buy the photographs from me, for their offices. So I had the money, and that just happened when I happened to be in Greenland at the time. So this is all via email. I found out about this, and the group I was with wanted to do a helicopter ride. Now helicopters are very expensive. This would have been something like almost $2,000 for like an hour and a half, which I, did not have that. I looked at my wallet, it wasn't there. So I said, wow, and then I wasn't going to go with these guys, and then I get this email. So I said, count me in, folks. So it just happened. It was one of those fluky things. So I went up in this helicopter and looking down at the glaciers, and originally I was thinking, well, I'm going to be up high, probably a long lens, wide lens. Because number one, you're not up that high, and the Earth is big. So there's no sense of scale whatsoever. But I look for, whether I'm down on the ground or up in the sky, I'm really just looking for the shapes of things. And I recognize, as you call them, dancing glaciers. And I think it was a lot of fun, and I saw that. I mean, that's a vast area of glacier on a mountain, in Iceland, a mountain of ice, with glaciers on the top that are melting. And now, because of global warming, there's more contrast. It's not all just ice. There's a lot of the earth showing, so you get all these different wonderful shapes. Like that photograph, the smaller one, a very abstract image, just a black and white. That is melting ice and snow in Iceland on a hillside, and that's all it is. But because of the melt, it just creates these wonderful abstract patterns, that just, they speak to me somehow. So I think of it as some kind of secret language somehow that I try to interpret. But you have to interpret it with feeling. You can't interpret it intellectually. The one I really like also, the one in the corner, the white water, black sands, that's at a beach called Vik. Vik means bay. Vik is a town also, and it's this black beach. And that beach is a very, very dangerous beach because it has a very, very unusually strong tide and extremely strong undertow. Now, I leave a pair of Wellingtons over there. Wellingtons are boots that go up to about here, and I have Wellingtons all over the world, in fact. Wellingtons and tripods. I have them in about 5 different countries, so I don't have to take them with me, So I see the surf coming in, and I kind of stand tall. Well, about 3 years ago, I underestimated the power of that surf coming in. And it just looked like white water coming in. I stand there, but right in back of one wave was another and another and another. Finally, and I could feel the sand moving under my feet, and then a wave knocked me over, and before I knew it, I was about 3 feet underwater. Camera, tripod, and me, kind of in the wintertime. And my only instinct was to survive, of course. So, to be able to breathe. So, I lost the camera, lost the tripod. I was soaking wet, freezing cold, but here I am. So obviously I survived it. But I tell people, how dangerous it is. Almost every day, people get knocked down there. And there are big signs now all over the place. At least once or twice a year, people are taken out to sea and never seen again. Because of the strong, strong undertow. When the tide is dead low, you can tell it's really calm, you can walk way out and it's calm. But this tiny bit of, you know, kind of the wind and the rain and you know, sometimes the waves come really far up on the beach and sometimes not at all. You gotta stay away. I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
You know, want to see you again next time I show here. You know? So I mean, you gotta be careful on that beach. And those of you who, you know, if you get there, you'll see big signs about the danger. Now it's really beautiful. I happened to be there when I made that exposure on a calm, kind of foggy day. You could see there were these kind of lava forms, you know, out in the sea there. Actually, they're called trolls, because there's a story about the trolls. There's all these legends. You know, like in Ireland, they have the fairies and the wee people. Well, in Iceland, we have trolls. Same kind of spirits of the land. So, you know, again, I worked with shapes, and I made a few exposures just trying to catch the water as it's coming, the white water on the black beach. In fact, I called the photograph White Water, you know, Black Beach. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about my progression from the darkroom to digital. You know, most of us, maybe all of us, who started in the darkroom probably went into digital photography kicking and screaming, to say it mildly. You know, I mean, I had probably close to 50 years experience in the darkroom, and I was teaching Ansel Adams' zone system. You know, that's what I taught at Clark University for about 30 years. And then people started showing up on my trips with digital cameras. I mean, at first I didn't even know what it was. You know, well, I found out soon enough, and I thought I better learn how to work a camera like this, because, you know, there are more and more people arriving with digital cameras. You know, when I first started leading tours, people who came with me all had view cameras like mine, mostly 4x5s. I was doing 8x10, but mostly 4x5s. Occasionally, even an 8x10. And then, as the years went on, I started seeing these digital cameras. Well, I said to myself, I better learn how to do this, or learn how to pack bags in the supermarket. Because, you know, I mean, if I'm a teacher of photography, this is the latest technology, I better hop on the wagon and find out what it's all about. So I asked a friend of mine who I trusted, he was one of the first people to bring a digital camera on one of my trips. I said, what do you recommend, you know, to get started in digital photography? And I think he recommended Canon PowerShot 1 or something like that. You know, like, I think it was like 4 megapixel little point and shoot camera. I ordered it. I think I went to B&H. I didn't know where to go, you know, so I got that camera. I opened the box, I looked at it, and I closed the box again. Like, it didn't make any sense to me. Remember I said before, I used to do something called photography, right? You had an f-stop and you had a shutter speed, you had a light meter, you knew how to set your camera. You know, if you knew the zone system, you could place your dark areas where you wanted them. You'd make notes how to develop to get your highlights where you wanted them. Like, it was basically not that much to it. You know, it took some testing to make it all work. You know, the emphasis was always on your vision. It wasn't that complicated. Now I see a camera with, you know, like a little wheel on it. It says AV, TV, PC. Like, what is this all about? I didn't have a clue what that meant. You know, and then a camera that has an off-on switch. You know, what is this, a toaster? You know, like, I didn't understand why you need an off-on switch for a camera. So, I mean, it was a bit of a shock, okay? I was afraid of the camera, basically. Two things kept me probably, you know, postponed my getting into digital photography for probably another 6 to 8 months. Fear and ignorance. Those are the two things that kept me. I mean, fear of, number one, I've been doing this for 50 years. I have to be a beginner again? Like, I'm too old to be a beginner. Like, I don't want to do this. And then ignorance, it's a different language. You know, I mean, it's the same vision, of course, but to make the camera work, so you feel it's part of you, so you don't have to kind of intellectually decide how to work it. When I was doing my view camera, I mean, it was like playing, you know, like you see a musician playing the piano or the guitar, they're not thinking about the notes are flowing from them. And it's the same thing when you're working the camera, it has to be part of you. So here, I just didn't want to start all over again, but I figured, geez, I gotta jump in here somehow. Okay, then I made the mistake of thinking, well, I'll read the manual. Big mistake. Okay, I got to about page 10 and I said, this isn't going to work. So I realized the only way I could learn, number one, is to identify a problem, one problem at a time, and solve that problem. Okay, that worked. Then I could use the manual, like what does the on-off switch do? You know, like little things like that. You know, what does AV mean or TV? Like I would have a problem and then I would find the solution. But you have to go one problem at a time and until you figure things out, you know, step by step, baby steps. In Morocco we say shweya shweya, slow slow. That's the only way to do it. Okay, well, I got to the point where I actually could, you know, make a photograph and look at it. That was pretty amazing. You know, you push a little triangle thing there. I didn't know what that was, but I mean, you know, I found out. I could look at the photo. I went through quite a time of picking the camera up out of my camera bag and touching something that I didn't know what it was, some button, you know, and then nothing would work, or I couldn't focus it, or the lens. I remember the first time I was out, and all my pictures when I'm shooting on a tripod, they're slightly fuzzy. And I was thinking, oh Jesus, something wrong with the lens, I gotta send it back, you know. And I did some research and I found out that you know, the vibration control has to be off when you're on a tripod. It's always something simple, you know, but you have to find these things out one thing at a time. You know, it took me quite a few years to feel comfortable with the camera. Now, there's a whole other aspect of digital photography. It's called, well, two other aspects. It's post-processing and printing. Well, I didn't know anything about that. I knew darkroom work. I was able to get the photographs on the little square, little thing, I think it's called a CF card or something like that. I'm still shaky with the terminology here. So, and then I knew people would go to like Walmart or CVS and there was a machine and you put the card in there. So that's how I started. I put the card in and I could see some basic controls, cropping, lighter, darker. There wasn't a whole lot. I mean, it was really quite basic. It didn't really do as much as I wanted to do. I said there has to be, you know, a way to really have control. Well, the man in the back, Mark Doyle, okay? Now, I've been a photographer like pretty much all my life. Well, Mark has been printing for like top photographers and even a bunch of National Geographic photographers. He's done some work for NASA, done some work for, like architectural photographers, very well known, people all around the world, like a real specialist, okay? I remember Ansel Adams once saying that he felt it took about 10 years to really master the craft of photography. And I was thinking, well, if I'm going to master the craft of printing, well, I'm going to be like, what, 85 or so? Like, I don't want to wait, you know? I want quality images right now. I mean, it's still my vision. Why can't I get the images that I wanted? Well, you know, I thought about, you know, printing it myself and investing in a good Epson printer and the inks and all that stuff. And, you know, anyhow, to make a long story short, when I found out what Mark can do, and I crunched the numbers. Now, I'm not a great number cruncher, but when it comes to buying a printer that could do like a 30-inch wide print and having to fill it with inks versus paying Mark to make a print that size, it's been a while since I had a print that size, but I'm guessing it was about $60, $70. Do you remember?
2024 is $38, so it's a little bigger than that. So,
So,
yeah.
you know, because the bigger inkjet
Yeah.
printers, and to fill them, you can spend $1,000 or more to fill them with ink, and then you gotta make 5 or 6, like in the darkroom, 5 or 6 prints to get it just right. But why should I do that when I can work with Mark for a fraction of the price and zero hassle? He has all the hassle. when his printer starts going drip, 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 he has to be the plumber to fix, to deal with that stuff, and I then, could really concentrate on my photography, on my teaching and getting, helping people with their vision. When I do workshops, it's more about vision. Let me talk a little bit about post-processing also. Way back when, figured, well, you gotta have Photoshop. So I got Photoshop, there was so much to it, I said, I gotta get something that can narrow it down a little bit more. Even Lightroom I had trouble with. Now, when I've always been a Mac person because my wife had a Mac, my kids have always had Macs, so I got a Mac, and it came with Aperture. Okay, now I know Aperture is no longer supported, but the Aperture police has not taken it away from me, so I still use Aperture. My whole library is in Aperture, but as you can see, I do a lot of black and white work, and I find the Nik software is really good for black and white. It's like working in the darkroom almost. Nik comes with a whole bunch of different software packages, I think about 5 of them, for Silver Effects Pro 2, Color Effects, Vivesa, some sharpening thing in HDR. They're all great. I use some of that for color as well, but for black and white, Silver Effects Pro 2 is so much like working in the darkroom. Of dark.
Is that the whole name of it, Silver Effects?
Silver Effects Pro 2. But if you were to Google it, you have to get the whole package. The whole deal is something.
I have Nik, but I forget what I use.
Oh, if you have Nik, you have Silver Effects Pro 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have Nik, that's what you have. And if you don't have Nik, you just Google it. NIK Nik software. It's owned by a company now called DxO. It went through a few different owners along the way. It's now owned by DxO. They support it. I think the whole package is something like $69. I bought the Silver Effects Pro 2 on its own when it first came out for something like $260 for the one program, and now the whole deal is like $69. And it's user friendly. Little sliders, darker, lighter, and you have these control points where you can put it in an area and you can make one little area darker or lighter or contrastier. You have so many things you can do with it. You can do some edge burning. Ansel called it edge burning, now it's called vignetting. Same thing. So now I work on my computer getting the best file I can get, right? Then I call up Mark, send him an email, whatever. We make a date. In fact, I'm going to see you in a couple of days. And I sit down with Mark in Worcester, Mass. Although people from all over the world will send him files that he works on, But I like the one-to-one business, and we'll put my images on Mark's bigger monitor as opposed to my little monitor, where he can see dust spots that I never knew existed, on the print. So he really cleans them up just fine, and then we kind of make some suggestions to each other. What about darkening this, lightening that, doing this, doing the other thing? Now, that's a little bit like, think of any author, no matter how famous they are, like Stephen King. He has a book editor, probably more than one, in fact. Every one of the arts has someone to kind of trim things up a little bit, tweak them just a little bit. So I feel like I have this little, like a photo editor. It's someone who we can bounce ideas off. Now, I don't go with everything Mark suggests. Sometimes I say, no, I really like it my way. Often it's a choice of, it's not a better or worse, it's just how you feel about it. We can't totally agree all the time. Mostly we do, but sometimes I prefer my way, and then sometimes I prefer Mark's way. And then that's it. Then I can go home and do the other stuff and let Mark finish it for me. And he's such a good guy. He often leaves the finished stuff off at my studio door. so I don't have to go back into Worcester to get it. It's only like 20 minutes away, you know. He does all of my printing, and I'm gonna let him talk and answer questions, you know, for 10 to 15 minutes. And let me tell you, before I do that, Mark's card is right here, and then he has this is kind of what he does. It's more of an advertising thing. It's some of the photographs that he's done. You're welcome to take any of this stuff, you know, after. And then when Mark is done, quickly, I didn't talk about this. The show I had at the Worcester Art Museum was based on this book called Hymn to the Earth. In 2011, I had a really pretty big show at the Worcester Art Museum. And there's poetry in here by the same man who does the poetry, you know, for this. So you might want to take a look at that. If you're interested in something called infrared photography, I do a lot of infrared. It's called the invisible light. Now, this has photographs and poetry in Irish, English, Spanish, and Japanese. I probably sell more of these in Japan than I do in any other country. They're very appreciative folks over there. So I just have a few left. So if you wanted afterwards, we can do that. But now I'm going to turn the floor over to my good friend and the man who does all the printing for me from since I went digital in 2004, Mark Doyle.
Thanks. So a little bit about me. I'm a photographer. That's what I've been all my life since I was a little guy. I had a cousin that had a darkroom, so I kind of get put there. I spent 12 years working in architecture photography with the top guy in the country. Traveled everywhere for 12 years. We'd come back and I would process the color negatives, which was C41, the E6, which was, transparency was E6, then the black and white, all shot on 4x5, and then print them all. And then we'd go back out. I did that for 12 years, and I'd be gone for weeks at a time. I was married, and you know, we started having kids. And my wife's like, "That's got to end." So, at the same time, a company had moved into Worcester called Evercolor Fine Art. Anybody hear about that place at all? It was the only place in the world you can get color photographs that last 300 to 500 years in direct sunlight. They basically figured out how to sensitize car paint pigments, and they would make separation films where it was a CMYK screen films, just like they do to make magazines, but these are high resolution, and they would contact print them CMYK, and you'd have these gorgeous prints. They're on a polyester base. The base would break down before the pigments. Wow. And that happened around the same time I was starting to have a family, so I got a job there and stopped the architectural thing, and did that for 6 years. They spent $6 million doing this. We had 30 employees and they went out of business, and I kind of picked up from where they left off in '99, so 20 years now doing this. We had the third printer in the country that used red, green, and blue lasers, exposed photographic paper. It's called a light jet at the time, and it had to be on a stable base. Any little vibrations would cause the laser would shoot up, hit a mirror, and go across 45, and then hit a mirror again and expose the paper. So you get scan lines. We had the third one made, and when they went out of business, they took that with them. So for a couple years, I burned CDs and FedEx them to Arizona, and then eventually got my own machine, which we're using now, which is called a Chromera. It's 50 inches wide, exposes photographic paper with red, green, and blue LEDs that go through fiber optic cables into a lens and then onto the paper. Yeah, it's crazy. It makes these prints here. These are all done on Fuji Crystal Archive color paper. The same paper we use to make these color prints here, which that's what these are. These are actually paper samples. So it takes 6 minutes to expose maybe a 50 by 50 inch piece, and then it also takes, trim it off in the dark, put it into a processor. It's chemicals. It's developer, bleach fix, 2 wash tanks, and a dryer. It takes 6 minutes to go from one end to the other, dry to dry. It's a pretty expensive machine. It's like $180,000 new. Probably a little cheaper now. And then you need the processor to feed this thing. So competition for me for a long time was maybe a guy that would buy an inkjet printer for $4 or $5 grand and put it in their garage, but now they're everywhere. But this machine here is mainly in big commercial labs because it takes a lot to feed them. What else do we do? Work in Photoshop pretty much all the time. I do use Lightroom for my personal stuff because it's kind of a catalog thing. Yeah. When I do shoot an event for a friend or wedding, I'll run it through there. Like I just shot the baseball team my kid's on. There's 60 individual shots and 3 group shots. Do that in Lightroom, you know. But all my fine art stuff is cataloged in Lightroom and then brought back out in the Photoshop for final tweaks. And that's pretty basic what we do. I worked the Evercolor days because of its process. You know, we worked for the Ansel Adams family would send stuff, Ed Weston, Francesco Scubullo, Irving Penn, Playboy, NASA, yep. And we kept relationships with a lot of those people through today. National Geographic, there's one guy just like Ron, he happens to live close by, but when he shoots, his name's Brian Scary. He's an underwater guy, travels around the world doing whales and sharks, basically. And he comes to me and we spend all day doing a kind of a pre-edit, making the pictures look beautiful. We even have the resolution of the monitors that the editors use in Geographic. We generate a final JPEG, and that's what he brings down to show them. And the crazy thing, he spends thousands of dollars to do this, and then when they go to publish it, they start from the raw files.
Oh.
They don't use my file. He uses my files to make prints.
So they edit it?
Yeah, they don't want, remember the Time magazine moving the pyramids?
Yeah.
Geographic doesn't want that to happen to them.
Wow.
So they go right back to the raw files. So even when we're working on his files, if there's like pieces of debris or his flash, we can't take that out because they want to see everything when they look at them. So
Right.
when we make his prints, we'll take some of that stuff out. So him and Ron live close enough to have the advantage of coming in to do that. Ron used to work the same way. He'd come in with pretty much a raw file. I remember when he started doing digital and he brought this, it was a little travel camera really.
Yeah, my first.
I'm like, Ron, get rid of this thing, he's shooting JPEGs. And he did, that day he drove up the hunt to get a camera that could shoot raw.
Right.
Yeah, so you shoot raw plus JPEG like everybody does, and then eventually just raw.
Yeah.
So Ron and Brian come in all the time to do that, and some local people, but most of them are mailing in files. Less and less I have to do work on them anymore, because people are getting so good at that. We're just making prints or little final tweaks.
And do you do more black and white or color?
Well, Ron and this guy, Henry Hornstein, do you know Henry? Yeah. We do all his printing, he's black and white. For the most part, it's color. Those two guys do most of the black and white. Henry does, he does this paper and also some on Epson Fine Art, which is a smooth paper.
Yeah.
Which I'm gonna have some samples there, but depends on what series of images it is. He's kind of got some on that and the rest on this stuff.
And what kind of paper is this?
Fuji Crystal Archive.
Are you able to print on like Japanese paper? Like,
Well, I do have an inkjet print, Epson P9000, so
Yeah.
whatever goes into that, we can print on. But we pretty much, we stock Epson papers only.
Yeah.
But we've gotten the bamboo papers and stuff for
Yeah.
people over the years. 80 to 90% of the work we do goes on the Chromier, the LED printer. We're doing a project right now, there's gonna be a triptych of 48 by 96 inch wide panels, 3 of them, of the Merrimack Valley rivers for the Deaconess Hospital. So we'll print them, we'll mount them, we can mount that stuff, and we're gonna go down and install it too.
do you allow visitors at?
Yeah,
Okay.
anytime, you gotta call ahead because it's really just me until 1 o'clock and I have 2 other guys that come in.
Yeah.
And I have a short attention span, so I'll go out, if it's sunny out, I go take pictures or I go get a coffee, so a lot of people miss me, like, I'm there, where are you? So
Yeah.
if I know you're coming, I'll be there.
It's just fascinating that this kind of printing that you're doing, I never heard of it before.
Yeah, well, I always tell people it's the same paper that you could get at Photomat back in the day, really, just, they've changed the formulation for the short exposure, kind of reciprocity.
Are you familiar with a Da Vinci printer?
No, is it on photo paper?
Yeah, but a guy I studied with a little bit, Stephen Schaub, I mean, he prints these, I mean, some of his work is like, you know, will fill the entire wall.
Yeah.
But
Could be, so the other printers that print on photo paper is the Lightjet, is a Durst Lambda, which is the most popular one.
Yeah.
Because that'll hold 3 to 4 and maybe 5 rolls in this turret, and they just
Yeah.
push a button and it switches it.
Yeah,
So the commercial labs like that, but it's a lot softer than this printer.
yeah.
So, I mean, New York City has these things that goes 60 inches wide, mine only goes 50.
you want for $180,000?
Yeah, they got volume too.
Yeah.
So I always say shoot raw, and if you're printing, some people get crazy, if you go over to the sheet of plywood size, which is 48 by 96 inches, the mounting materials get crazy expensive. Some people do it, so, and then the next size up is 60 by 120, so 5 by 10 feet, if you ever get really big on stuff, but.
What size is this one again?
That's 30-inch wide, the print is 30-inch.
30-inch.
Yeah, the long dimension from
Yeah.
corner to corner is 30, 'cause I know because I had a dry mounting press that Josh can tell you about,
What-
that could take a 30-inch print. I used to dry mount, okay,
Oh.
years ago.
The
Now
size
I
is
do
like
photo corners.
$27 for that size.
27.
20,
That is-
so the one in between is 38, 2024 is 38, and that one, I don't know, you know, those are two prices I remember, but we have a high resolution drum scanner for people to shoot film. And I was mentioning earlier that it doesn't do good on color negatives. And the reason is, no matter how expensive these scanners are, the one that I have at one time was $80,000. They did it, they developed it for NASA. I didn't pay that, but they produce noise. Noise happens in the densest part of the original, and a color negative, that's gonna be the whites, the clouds. And all of a sudden you'll see a 3-color grain structure showing up there. The flatbed scanners do a better job at scanning negatives, color negatives. Black and white negatives, we scan them all day long, and people like the grain, so. But we only own a drum scanner, so.
How archival are they?
These supposedly, so, I always say, what do you mean by archive? What's that word mean?
How long will they last?
That's what
Under-
archival means?
Under what conditions?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
say, it used to mean totally reversible to the original state, and I forget the years it used to say, but it's, nobody gives me the same answer when I ask them.
Mhm.
These will go 70 years before they show any noticeable fading under a condition like this. Now that said, because Evercolor had their pigment transfer prints rated at, I told you, 300 to 500 years, that's kind of fake news, because Henry Wilhelm, who did the testing, never finished the test. That was an estimate. And then he got in trouble 10 years ago. Great guy, he does really good work, but he didn't calculate for the ozone layer over New York City, so there was a certain set of inks and paper off inkjet prints that were fading really quick. That's been reformulated, and they work great now, but things like that happen all the time in this business, you know?
Yeah, what's new?
Right, so, that's what I tell you, that's what Fuji tells me, but who knows, you know? I know they'll last them 20 years, or 30 years I've been doing these now, so. It's the same paper, a little different exposure unit, 25 years later, 30 years later, so.
I put some of your prints in my south-facing window.
Yep.
And it literally, Scotch tape in the window, and like, you know, just like the, you know, the white edges, and I put it there for a year, and then I compare it to something that's been kept in a dark box. You hardly tell the difference.
Yeah.
Hardly tell the difference. So you know, archival to me means a long time.
Right, I think that's what it means now.
It'll outlive us.
It'll outlive us for sure. But no one knows, you see. You can't, as you said, with the ozone layer going, I mean, the variables are changing all the time.
Right.
So.
The good news is you can
pretty good-
remake.
Pretty good though.
Back in the day, you had to get an edition printed all at once, because it's hard to redo it with the, you can get the same look 10 years from now, or, you know? And the archival thing is, like I said, so if we were to mount that for you, we use pressure sensitive adhesive as opposed to the heated stuff. You have to be able to get that back off, which is hard to do, you know? But, the crazy thing, we have these, you ever hear of John Wozniak? You guys know John? He was one of the owners of Evercolor, and I still have prints of his that are 40-50 mounted on a gator foam that is supposed to last a long time. We pulled some out the other day, and when we were carrying them downstairs, little pieces were flaking off, so the foam inside is starting to break down. And these are indoors, so it's kind of, Ron's are not mounted, his are corners.
Yeah. So
So he can pull his right out and redo them.
Yeah, I use archival paper to make little photo corners. So there's no tape, and I use archival tape too, but it's not touching the print at all. I make a corner and I put the tape on the little corner itself. You see, so the prints, and I do that because of the show I had at the Worcester Art Museum in 2011. They didn't want any dry-mounted prints. This is all museums now. They kind of are on the same bandwagon. It all has to be photo corners. They won't accept dry-mounted prints. Even though I had many that were perfect.
Yep.
Didn't make any difference. They have to have it in photo corners. So I do all photo corners. That's why I gave my press to Josh, who was able to give it, sell it to someone else, and brought in a little bit of cash for this place. So it worked out really well because it was just making dust in my my studio. Didn't need it anymore.
We were doing stuff 5 years ago, I don't know if it's changed, but the Museum of Art in LA would want to mount it on a piece of aluminum with 4-inch border, so there's a pretty thick piece of aluminum. Maybe they've gone,
Aluminum?
yeah. It's almost as thick as 4-ply mat board, it's really expensive, and they wanted it floated in the middle, I guess for damages, but maybe they're going with loose prints now.
Folks, we can see if you have any questions because
Thank
we're
you.
Yeah, my business cards, you can email or call, they're here.
Great.
And take one of these sample prints, these are all done on Fuji Personal Archive, the same paper that you're seeing on the wall here. Let's make sure nothing's snuck in here, there's a couple inkjet prints, but I'll take
So-
them out.
Ron will be happy to sign any books for anyone that wants to pick up a book. You can check with him on those. And I want to just thank you guys for coming. And we'll give